Keiko Miyamoto's voice cut through the silence of the Shotokan dojo like a blade through silk. I challenge the American. 300 people stopped breathing. October 23, 1966. Tokyo. The most prestigious women's karate tournament in Japan had just ended with Keiko's 40th consecutive victory, a devastating Mawashi-jeri that had left her opponent unconscious for 12 seconds. She stood in the center of the dojo now, her GI still crisp despite 3 brutal matches, her face showing no emotion, her eyes locked on a single figure sitting in the third row of spectators. Bruce Lee. He'd been invited as a courtesy, a rising television actor from America, known for playing Kato in The Green Hornet, rumored to have actual martial arts skill beyond the choreographed violence of Hollywood. An honored guest, an observer, nothing more, until Keiko Miyamoto made him something more. I challenge the American, she repeated, her voice steady, formal, absolute. Her Japanese was precise, each syllable weighted with intention. American Kung Fu versus Japanese Karate. Show us if your style is real, or if it is only for television cameras. The insult was deliberate, calculated, designed to make refusal impossible. But the truly shocking part, the part that made the entire dojo inhale sharply, the part that would be discussed in hushed tones for decades, wasn't the challenge itself. It was that a woman had issued it. In 1966 Japan, this was cultural suicide. Women didn't challenge men. Women didn't speak with such directness. Women, even karate champions, knew their place, maintained decorum, respected hierarchy. Keiko Miyamoto had just shattered every rule. And Bruce Lee, sitting in the third row, understood immediately that he had 2 choices. Accept the challenge and risk humiliating Japan's greatest female martial artist in front of her entire community. Or refuse the challenge and guarantee her humiliation, because everyone would know he declined to fight a woman, which meant he didn't take her seriously as a martial artist. There was no third option. Let me show you how he got here. 14 hours earlier, Bruce Lee stepped off Japan Airlines Flight 002 at Tokyo International Airport at 6:47 a.m. on October 23, 1966. The flight from Los Angeles had taken 11 hours, crossing the Pacific in a Boeing 707 that had spent most of the journey shaking through turbulence over the ocean. Bruce carried one small bag. He'd learned years ago to travel light, a habit from his Hong Kong childhood when his family had moved frequently, often with little notice. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, a notebook filled with training observations and philosophical notes, and a paperback copy of Krishnamurti's Freedom from the Known that he'd been reading on the flight. At 26, Bruce was in the transitional space between obscurity and fame. The Green Hornet had premiered on ABC just 6 weeks earlier, on September 9th. The show was gaining traction in America. Bruce's Kato was already more popular than Van Williams' Green Hornet, a fact that both pleased and concerned the network executives who hadn't expected the sidekick to overshadow the hero. But in Japan, Bruce was barely known. The show hadn't aired here yet. A few martial artists had heard of him through the community grapevine. The Chinese-American who'd studied Wing Chun under Yip Man, who'd won the 1964 Long Beach tournament demonstration, who was teaching something called Junfan Gung Fu that seemed to blend multiple styles. Interesting, perhaps, but not famous. The invitation to observe the All-Japan Women's Karate Championship had come through Taiki Kimura, Bruce's senior student and friend in Seattle. Taiki had connections in the Japanese martial arts community. His family had maintained relationships despite the internment during World War II and had arranged for Bruce to attend as a courtesy observer. It's a goodwill thing, Taiki had explained over the phone 2 weeks earlier. They want to show respect to Chinese martial arts. You watch the tournament, meet some people, maybe learn something about how they train. Don't expect to do any demonstrating. They're traditional, very traditional. The subtext was clear: don't make waves. Don't challenge anyone. Just observe and be respectful. Bruce had agreed because he was genuinely curious about traditional karate. He'd seen demonstrations, had sparred with karateka in California, but he'd never observed high-level competition in Japan itself. This was an opportunity to see the source, to understand how the art functioned in its cultural context. At the airport, he was met by two men in formal business attire. Takashi Nakamura, 7th Dan Shotokan and master of the host dojo, and his assistant, a younger man named Sato, who spoke halting English. Nakamura was 58, his hair completely gray, his face showing the weathered dignity of someone who'd survived the war and rebuilt in its aftermath. He bowed formally when Bruce approached. "Listen," Nakamura said, his English heavily accented but carefully practiced. "Welcome to Japan. We are honored by your presence." Bruce returned the bow, matching the depth and duration exactly, a sign of respect that Nakamura noted with a slight nod of approval. "The honor is mine, Nakamura-sensei," Bruce replied in Japanese. His Japanese was functional but limited, learned from books and a few conversations with Japanese students in California. "Thank you for the invitation." Nakamura's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised that Bruce spoke any Japanese at all. "Your Japanese is good," he said, switching to his native language, speaking slowly enough for Bruce to follow. "Not good," Bruce corrected politely, staying in Japanese. "But I am learning. A martial artist should understand the language of the art he studies." Nakamura studied Bruce for a moment. This young American who'd bothered to learn Japanese, who showed proper respect, who understood protocol. The old master's face softened incrementally. "Come," Nakamura said. "The tournament begins at 2 o'clock. We will show you Tokyo first. You must be hungry." They drove through Tokyo in Nakamura's car, a Toyota Crown, pristine and meticulously maintained. The city was a study in contrasts. Ancient temples neighboring modern concrete buildings, traditional wooden houses pressed against steel and glass offices. Post-war reconstruction was still visible everywhere. New construction, fresh paint, the determined energy of a nation rebuilding itself. Nakamura pointed out landmarks as they drove, his pride evident. The Imperial Palace, Sensoji Temple, the Ginza district with its department stores and Western influence. "Tokyo is changing," Nakamura said, his tone complicated, pride mixed with something like mourning. "After the war, we had to change, adapt, but we try to keep what is essential. What makes us Japanese?" Bruce understood the subtext. Western influence was everywhere, unavoidable but not entirely welcome. The invitation to Bruce, an American, even if ethnically Chinese, was itself a concession to this new reality. Japan could no longer pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. They ate lunch at a small restaurant near the dojo, traditional Japanese cuisine, served with the ceremonial precision that Bruce was learning characterized everything in Japan. Every action had meaning, had protocol, had centuries of tradition behind it. "The women's tournament this afternoon is important," Nakamura explained over tea. "Women's karate is new, only 15 years old as official competition. Many in the martial arts community still debate whether women should practice karate at all." Bruce kept his face neutral, but internally he was processing this information. 15 years. In 1966, that meant women's competitive karate had begun around 1951, just 6 years after the war ended. "What do you think?" Bruce asked carefully. "About women practicing karate?" Nakamura considered the question, his face showing the internal conflict of a traditional man trying to navigate changing times. "Karate is about character development," Nakamura said finally. "About discipline, respect, self-improvement. These qualities are valuable for everyone. So yes, women should practice." But he paused, choosing words carefully. "Competition is different. Competition is about dominance, about defeating opponents. This is difficult for Japanese culture to accept from women." Bruce nodded, understanding. What Nakamura was really saying, women can practice karate as exercise or self-defense, but excelling at it, being better than men, that's problematic. "The champion you will see today," Nakamura continued, his voice dropping slightly, "Keiko Miyamoto. She is exceptional. 40 consecutive victories. No losses. Ever. She is better than most of the men in my dojo." The way Nakamura said it, the slight hesitation, the drop in volume, told Bruce everything. This was a problem. Not Keiko's skill, but the implications of her skill. What it meant that a woman could be better than men. You seem troubled by this, Bruce observed. Nakamura's face showed surprise that Bruce had perceived this, then resignation. I am troubled because I do not know what to do with her, Nakamura admitted. She has achieved 4th Dan, the highest rank any woman has achieved in Shotokan. She wishes to test for 5th Dan, but there is no precedent. No woman has ever been 5th Dan. If I promote her, I set a precedent that will change everything. If I refuse her, I deny her something she has clearly earned. So you are waiting, Bruce said. I am waiting, Nakamura confirmed, hoping the situation will resolve itself somehow. They finished lunch and drove to the dojo, a traditional building on the grounds of a Shinto shrine, wooden construction, immaculately maintained. The tournament was already beginning, the spectator area filling with karateka from across Japan, all men except for the women competitors and a handful of wives and girlfriends in the back rows. Nakamura led Bruce to a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to see everything, far enough back to signal that Bruce was an observer, not a judge or participant. Please enjoy, Nakamura said, bowing. If you need anything, Sato will assist you. He gestured to his assistant, who had taken a seat at the end of the row, ready to translate or fetch whatever Bruce might need. Bruce settled into the hard-wooden seat and prepared to watch. The women's division consisted of 8 competitors, all brown or black belts, all with competitive records. The matches were 3 minutes each, full contact but with control, strikes pulled at the last moment, points awarded for clean technique. Bruce watched with the analytical eye he'd developed over years of study. The karateka were technically proficient, sharp stances, powerful strikes, disciplined form. But they were also, with one exception, predictable. They moved within the rigid framework of Shotokan kata, executing techniques exactly as they'd been taught, following patterns that had been established decades earlier. It was beautiful in its way, like watching classical ballet. Every movement precise, controlled, aesthetically perfect. But from a practical fighting perspective, Bruce saw gaps everywhere. The deep stances that generated power, but sacrificed mobility. The committed strikes that left recovery time an opponent could exploit. The linear thinking that assumed attacks would come from predictable angles. This was what Bruce had been developing Jeet Kune Do to address. The limitations of classical forms, the way tradition could become a cage rather than a foundation. But then Keiko Miyamoto entered the floor for her semifinal match, and Bruce sat up straighter. She was different. At 5'6", she was tall for a Japanese woman, nearly as tall as many of the men in the audience. Her GI was traditional, plain white with her 4th Dan black belt, but the way she wore it suggested power rather than formality. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her face showing no emotion, her eyes focused with laser intensity on her opponent. But it was how she moved that caught Bruce's attention. She didn't shuffle into position like the other competitors. She flowed. Her stance was traditional Zenkutsudachi, forward stance, but she held it differently, lighter on her feet, ready to shift instantly. Her opponent, a 3rd Dan from Osaka named Yuki Takahashi, was good. Quick hands, strong kicks, 18 wins against 3 losses. A legitimate competitor. The match lasted 47 seconds. Keiko opened with a feint, a Lome Jerry that drew Yuki's guard down. Then she launched her signature technique, a Mawashi Jerry roundhouse kick that came in high and fast and with terrifying power. Bruce had seen thousands of kicks in his life. He'd trained with Korean stylists who specialized in high kicks, had sparred with Taekwondo practitioners whose kicking speed was legendary. Keiko's Mawashi Jerry was as fast as any he'd seen. The kick connected with Yuki's temple, controlled, but the impact was still significant. Yuki's eyes rolled back. Her knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor, unconscious before she hit the ground. The referee called the match immediately. Medical attention rushed onto the floor. Keiko stood in her corner, face still emotionless, waiting. Yuki regained consciousness after 12 seconds. Long enough to be seriously concerning, short enough to avoid permanent damage. She was helped off the floor, disoriented but walking. Keiko bowed to her opponent's corner. The gesture was respectful but perfunctory, and left the floor to prepare for the finals. Bruce watched her exit and thought, she's not just good, she's exceptional, and she knows it. And that knowledge sits uncomfortably in this culture. Around him, the crowd was murmuring. Bruce's Japanese wasn't good enough to catch everything, but he caught enough. Too powerful, unnatural for a woman, dangerous, who will marry her. The subtext was clear. Keiko's skill was impressive but problematic. A woman who could knock out opponents with single kicks, who moved with the confidence of someone who knew she could dominate anyone in the room. This was culturally destabilizing. The finals were scheduled for 4 p.m. after a 30-minute break. Bruce stood, stretched, walked outside to the courtyard for fresh air. Sato followed at a respectful distance. "What do you think of Miyamoto-san?" Sato asked in English, his grammar careful. Bruce chose his words thoughtfully. "She's very skilled. Her Mawashi Jeri is world-class, and her timing is excellent. The way she set up that kick with the feint showed sophisticated fight IQ." Sato nodded, then hesitated. "Some people say she is too aggressive. That karate for women should be different. More defensive. More," he searched for the word, "appropriate. What do you think?" Bruce asked. Sato's face showed conflict. "I think she is better than me. Better than most men in our dojo. But I'm not supposed to say this. It is not good to say a woman is better." Bruce understood. He'd encountered this attitude in California too. Men whose egos couldn't handle the idea that a woman might be their superior in martial arts. But in 1966 Japan, that attitude wasn't just personal ego, it was cultural structure, social order, the foundation of how the society understood itself. They returned inside for the finals. Keiko's opponent was another fourth Dan, Michiko Tanaka, 34-2 in competition. Tanaka was smaller, 5'2", maybe 115 pounds, but quick with a reputation for defensive excellence and counterpunching accuracy. The match was more competitive than Keiko's previous bouts. Tanaka used movement and angles, refusing to stand still long enough for Keiko to set up her power kicks. For the first 90 seconds, they circled each other, throwing probing techniques, both looking for openings. Then Keiko made an adjustment. She'd been setting up high kicks, Mawashi Jeri aimed at the head, trying to replicate the knockout from the semifinals. But Tanaka had clearly studied Keiko's pattern and was ready for high kicks, keeping her guard up, staying mobile. So Keiko went low. A sweep, Ashibarai, perfectly timed as Tanaka shifted her weight. Tanaka went down hard, landing on her back, the impact forcing air from her lungs. Before Tanaka could recover, Keiko was on her. Technically, this was ground fighting, which traditional Shotokan didn't emphasize, with a controlled strike poised above Tanaka's solar plexus. Point. They reset. Tanaka was rattled now. Her breathing elevated, her strategy disrupted. Keiko didn't give her time to recover. She pressed forward with a combination, Gyakuzuki, Oizuki, Mawashi Jeri, each technique flowing into the next, the rhythm building, forcing Tanaka backward. The final kick came high again, the signature Mawashi Jeri, but this time it was a setup. Tanaka raised her guard to block the high kick, and Keiko switched mid-technique, bringing the kick down to the body instead, her instep slamming into Tanaka's ribcage with audible impact. Tanaka doubled over. The referee's whistle blew. Match over. Keiko Miyamoto, 40 wins, 0 losses. Undisputed champion. The crowd applauded, respectfully, formally, without enthusiasm. Keiko stood in the center of the floor, her breathing controlled, her face still showing no emotion. She received her trophy from Nakamura-sensei, a small ceremony, brief words of congratulation, and bowed to the judges. Then her eyes swept the crowd and locked on Bruce Lee, sitting in the third row. Bruce felt the weight of that gaze, saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, saw the decision being made, and knew, with absolute certainty, what was about to happen. Oh no, Bruce thought. Please don't. But Keiko Miyamoto had already made her choice. She turned to face Nakamura-sensei, bowed formally, and when she rose, Her voice carried across the silent dojo. "Nakamura-sensei, with respect, I wish to issue a challenge." Nakamura's face went pale. "Miyamoto-san, this is not the time. I challenge the American," Keiko continued, her voice steady, absolute. She switched to English, heavily accented but clear enough. "American Kung Fu versus Japanese Karate. Show us if your style is real or if it is only for television cameras." The silence that followed was total. 300 people forgot to breathe. Every eye in the dojo turned to look at Bruce Lee, sitting in the third row, his face carefully neutral, his mind calculating a dozen implications simultaneously. Nakamura leaned toward his assistant and whispered in Japanese, assuming Bruce couldn't understand. "She has just destroyed herself. A woman challenging a man. She will never recover from this shame." Bruce, whose Japanese was better than Nakamura knew, heard every word, and understood that refusing the challenge wouldn't save Keiko's reputation. It would only confirm that even her greatest achievement, 40 consecutive victories, meant nothing because she was a woman. There was only one way to honor her courage: accept and fight her as he would fight any master. Bruce stood slowly. The entire dojo held its breath. "I accept," Bruce said in Japanese, his accent careful but his meaning clear. Then, switching to English for emphasis, 3 minutes. "Light contact. No face strikes. These are acceptable terms." Keiko's face showed no reaction, but Bruce saw something flash in her eyes. Relief? Vindication? Respect? "These terms are acceptable," Keiko replied in English. Nakamura-sensei looked like he might be sick, but the challenge had been issued and accepted publicly. There was no way to stop this now without losing face for everyone involved. 20 minutes to prepare, Nakamura announced, his voice strained. "Then we will begin." Bruce bowed to Keiko. She returned the bow, formal, respectful, deep enough to show genuine respect rather than dismissive courtesy. Then both of them left the floor to prepare for a match that would become legend. A match that would change both their lives. A match that, 58 years later, would be almost entirely erased from official histories because in 1966 Japan, some stories were too dangerous to preserve. To understand why Keiko Miyamoto issued that challenge, why she risked everything for 3 minutes on a dojo floor, you have to understand what it meant to be a woman who fought in 1966 Japan. You have to understand what it cost her to become what she was. And you have to understand why, by the time Bruce Lee arrived in Tokyo that October, she had already decided that the cost no longer mattered. Keiko was 7 years old when her father came home from the war with one leg. Yoshiro Miyamoto had left for Manchuria in 1942, a second Dan karateka and judo practitioner, a sergeant in the Imperial Japanese Army. He'd returned in August 1945, 3 weeks after Nagasaki, carried off a hospital ship on a stretcher because the prosthetic leg he'd been fitted with in the military hospital didn't fit properly and the wound hadn't healed. Keiko remembered the sound he made coming up the steps to their house. Thump drag, the wooden crutch hitting each step, then the scuff of his remaining foot pulling his body weight upward. She'd been playing in the front room with her younger sister when she heard it. Her mother had frozen, chopsticks halfway to her mouth, her face showing something Keiko had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of Yoshiro. Fear of what he'd become. When he came through the door, thinner than Keiko remembered, his face hollowed out by pain and defeat, his left trouser leg pinned up where the leg should have been, her mother had bowed formally and said the words that proper Japanese wives said. "Welcome home, husband. We are grateful for your return." But Keiko, at 7, hadn't learned to hide her feelings yet. She'd burst into tears and run to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, feeling how thin he was, how fragile. This man who'd been strong enough to lift her over his head before he left. "Don't cry, Keiko-chan," her father had said, his voice rough from disuse. "Your father is home. That's what matters." But it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that her father, who'd taught karate to neighborhood boys before the war, who'd won judo tournaments, who'd moved with the confidence of someone who knew his body was a weapon, had returned broken. Over the next months, Keiko watched him try to adapt. The prosthetic leg was refitted twice, but it never quite worked. It rubbed raw spots on his stump. The straps cut into his waist. Walking more than a few minutes left him exhausted. But worse than the physical limitation was the psychological wound. Yoshiro had been a martial artist. Movement had been his language, his identity, his purpose. And now movement was pain. He tried to practice kata in the small courtyard behind their house. Keiko would watch through the window, see him attempt stances he'd once held with perfect stability, see him lose his balance, catch himself on the wall, his face showing the kind of frustrated fury that had nowhere to go. After 3 months, he stopped trying, stopped practicing, stopped teaching the neighborhood boys who came asking if Miyamoto-sensei would train them again. Stopped being a martial artist. Started being a man who worked at the fish market, who came home smelling of salt and dead things, who drank too much cheap sake and sat silent through dinner. Keiko was 8 when she asked the question that would change both their lives. She'd been watching him sit in the courtyard, staring at nothing, a bottle of sake beside him, the evening light making his face look older than 34. Otu-san, she said quietly, using the formal term for father. Will you teach me karate? He turned to look at her, his face showing confusion, as if he'd forgotten she could speak. Karate is not for girls, he said automatically. The same answer every father gave to this question. Why not? Keiko asked. Because it is not, Yoshiro said, his tone indicating the discussion was over. But Keiko was her father's daughter. Stubborn, persistent, unwilling to accept because, as an answer. Nakamura-sensei teaches girls, Keiko said. This was technically true. Nakamura ran a karate class at the community center that included a few girls, though they were taught separately from the boys and given modified instruction that focused on kata performance rather than fighting applications. Nakamura-sensei teaches girls to dance, Yoshiro said dismissively. Not to fight. There is a difference. Then teach me to fight, Keiko said. Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a bitter one. Why would I teach you to fight? So you can end up like me? Broken? Unable to do the thing that defined you. He gestured at his missing leg. Martial arts is about sacrifice, Keiko. About dedicating your body to something that will destroy it eventually. Why would I want that for my daughter? Because you loved it, Keiko said simply. Before the war. Before you were hurt. You loved karate. I remember. You would come home from teaching and you would be happy. Really happy. Not pretending. Yoshiro's face showed something complicated. Pain, yes, but also recognition. I did love it, he admitted quietly. I loved it more than anything except your mother and you children. And the war took it from me. The war took your leg, Keiko corrected. But karate is still here. In your mind. In your knowledge. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean it's gone. At 8 years old, Keiko didn't fully understand what she was saying. She was just trying to make her father less sad. But her words landed like a punch to his solar plexus. Yoshiro stared at her, his eyes focusing for the first time in months. You really want to learn? He asked. Yes. Why? Keiko thought about this. At 8, she didn't have sophisticated reasons. She didn't know about gender barriers or cultural limitations or the ways society would try to stop her. She just knew one thing. Because you can't do it anymore, she said. And someone should. Her father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, before your mother wakes up, we begin. Underscore. Underscore. 1946 to 1951, the secret years. They trained every morning for 5 years. 5 a.m. in the courtyard behind the house, before the neighbors were awake, before her mother could object, before the world could tell them this was inappropriate. Yoshiro couldn't demonstrate techniques anymore. Not the way he once had, with his whole body. But he could describe them. Could show hand positions. Could correct Keiko's stance by adjusting her feet with his crutch. Could teach her the theory behind every movement, the why beneath the how. Karate is geometry, he told her during their first lesson. Your body creates angles. Your opponent creates angles. Victory goes to whoever understands the angles better. He taught her stances first. Hours of holding Zankutsadachi, the forward stance, until her legs shook and tears ran down her face. Then Kibadachi, the horse stance, which was somehow worse. Then Kakutsadachi, the back stance, which required balance Keiko didn't know she had. Stance is foundation, Yoshiro would say. Everything built on weak foundation will collapse. Your stance must be stone. When her stances satisfied him, 6 months of daily practice, he taught her to strike. Suki, the straight punch. Hundreds every morning. Thousands every week. Her knuckles bled and scabbed and hardened. Her shoulders burned with constant muscle fatigue. But gradually, her punches began to sound different when they cut through air, sharper, faster, more committed. A punch is not your arm moving, Yoshiro explained. A punch is your entire body moving, with your arm as the final expression. The power comes from your feet, travels through your hips, accelerates through your core, and explodes from your fist. Your arm is just the weapon. Your body is the warrior. Kicks came next. Meijeri, the front kick. Mawashi Jeri, the roundhouse kick. Yoko Jeri, the side kick. Ushiro Jeri, the back kick. Keiko fell in love with kicking. Something about the mechanics, the chamber, the snap, the recoil, felt natural to her in a way punching never quite did. She would practice Mawashi Jeri until the sun came up, her father correcting the angle of her hip, the position of her support foot, the timing of the snap. Your kicking has violence in it, Yoshiro observed when she was 12. That's good. Karate without violence is dance. But control your violence. Make it precise. Unfocused violence is just chaos. They kept the training secret for 5 years. Her mother knew. It was impossible to hide, living in the same house, but she didn't object as long as it stayed private. As long as Keiko maintained her duties as a daughter, attended school, helped with housework, didn't embarrass the family. Keiko lived a double life. Proper Japanese schoolgirl by day, karateka by dawn. In 1951, when Keiko was 13, 2 things happened that would determine the rest of her life. First, her father tested her. They'd been training for 5 years. Keiko knew all the basic kata, Heian 1 through 5, Teki 1, the foundational forms of Shotokan. She could execute techniques with precision that impressed even Yoshiro, who was a harsh judge. But she'd never actually fought anyone. Tomorrow, Yoshiro said one morning after training, I want you to spar with Hiroshi Tanaka. Keiko's stomach dropped. Hiroshi Tanaka was the son of their neighbor, 16 years old, a first Q brown belt who trained at Nakamura-sensei's dojo. He was 40 pounds heavier than Keiko and had been training for 4 years in a formal dojo with other students. Ota-san, I can't. You can, Yoshiro interrupted. I have seen your technique. It is excellent. But technique alone is not karate. You must test it against resistance. Against someone who wants to win. Hiroshi is perfect for this. He is skilled, but not exceptional. If you cannot defeat Hiroshi, you have no future in karate. And if I can defeat him? Keiko asked. Her father's face showed something complicated. Pride mixed with worry. Then we have a decision to make, he said. The match happened the next morning in the courtyard, with only Yoshiro as witness. Hiroshi had agreed reluctantly. The idea of sparring with a girl was embarrassing for him, a no-win situation. If he won, he'd beaten a younger, smaller female. If he lost, he'd lost to a younger, smaller female. He pulled his punches for the first minute, treating it like play fighting with a child. Then Keiko's Mawashi Jeri caught him in the ribs, controlled, but with enough power to make him gasp, and his attitude changed. The match lasted 3 minutes. Keiko won by 2 clean points, the kick to the ribs, and a sweep that put Hiroshi on his back. When it was over, Hiroshi left the courtyard without speaking, his face showing the complicated shame of a boy who'd just learned a girl was better than him. Yoshiro watched him leave, then turned to Keiko. You understand what just happened? He asked. I won, Keiko said. You did more than win, Yoshiro corrected. You humiliated him. Not because you wanted to, but because the fact of your victory is inherently humiliating to him. That will always be true. Every time you defeat a male opponent, He will be humiliated not by the loss itself, but by who he lost to. That is not your fault, but it is your reality. Keiko nodded, beginning to understand. So, we have a decision, Yoshiro continued. You can stop training now. Marry in a few years. Be a wife and mother. No one will know about your karate. It will be our secret, a thing we shared, a gift I gave you. Or, he paused, his face grave, you can continue. Train formally. Compete. Become a karateka I see in you. But if you choose that path, you must understand, you will never be accepted. You will win and win and win, and it will never be enough. They will always find ways to diminish your victories, and you'll be alone. At 13, Keiko didn't fully grasp the weight of this choice. She just knew one thing. She loved karate, loved it more than anything. The way her body felt when she moved through kata, the satisfaction of a perfectly executed technique, the puzzle of combat, the endless journey toward mastery. She couldn't imagine stopping. I choose to continue, she said. Yoshiro nodded. He'd expected this answer, hoped for it, even despite his warnings. Then tomorrow we visit Nakamura-sensei, he said, and we see if he will accept a female student who wishes to train seriously. The second thing that changed Keiko's life was the announcement that Japan would hold its first ever women's karate tournament. The tournament was controversial from its inception. Many traditionalists argued that women's karate should remain non-competitive. Practice was acceptable, but competition turned karate into sport rather than art, and sport was fundamentally masculine. But the post-war occupation had brought American ideas about women's equality, and the Japanese government was trying to appear modern, progressive. So the tournament was approved as a trial. Nakamura-sensei agreed to accept Keiko as a student, though not without reservations. Your father says you have trained privately, Nakamura said during her evaluation. Show me. Keiko performed Heian Goden, the fifth and most complex of the fundamental kata. She executed it with precision that made Nakamura's eyebrows rise. Your technique is good, he acknowledged. Better than I expected. But kata alone is not karate. Can you fight? Yes, sensei. Show me. Hiroshi. Nakamura called to his senior student. The same Hiroshi that Keiko had defeated in her father's courtyard. Hiroshi's face showed recognition and dismay. Spar with this girl, Nakamura instructed. 2 minutes. Show me her capability. Hiroshi bowed reluctantly and took his position. This time, he didn't pull his punches. This time, he fought like he had something to prove. It didn't matter. Keiko's Mawashijiri caught him in the same spot, ribs controlled but firm, and then again when he tried a close distance. The second kick was harder, meant to establish dominance, and Hiroshi stumbled backward, the air forced from his lungs. Nakamura called the match. Acceptable, he said, his tone neutral but his eyes showing something else. Surprise? Concern? Recognition that he'd just accepted a student who would change his dojo in ways he couldn't predict? You may train here, Nakamura said, but you will train separately from the male students. Different schedule. I cannot have you sparring with them regularly. It would be inappropriate. Understood, sensei, Keiko said, though she didn't understand at all. Why was it inappropriate? She'd just proven she could hold her own. But she was learning. The rules weren't about capability. They were about comfort, about maintaining the order of things. She trained at Nakamura's dojo for 5 years, mostly alone or with a handful of other women who came and went, few of them serious, most of them treating karate as exercise rather than study. Keiko treated it as obsession. She trained 6 days a week, morning practice with her father before school, evening practice at the dojo after. She ate properly, slept adequately, gave up everything that didn't serve the goal of becoming excellent. By age 16, she was first Q, 1 rank below black belt. By age 18, she was first Dan, the youngest woman to achieve black belt in Nakamura's dojo. By age 21, she was third Dan and had won her first tournament, the Fukuoka Regional Women's Championship, 1959. She won by knockout in all 3 matches. The decade between Keiko's first tournament and the October day Bruce Lee arrived in Tokyo was a blur of training, competing, winning, and pushing against a ceiling that wouldn't break. She fought 40 sanction matches, won all 40, 23 by knockout or technical knockout, 12 by decision, 5 by opponent withdrawal, usually injury, usually from Keiko's kicks. She won the All Japan Women's Championship 5 times, 1960, 1962, 1963, 1965, 1966. She achieved 4th Dan in 1964 at age 26, the highest rank any woman in Japan had reached. And then she stopped advancing. Not because her skill stopped improving, not because she stopped winning, but because there was nowhere to advance to. In 1965, she asked Nakamura-sensei to test her for 5th Dan. His response: "There is no precedent for a woman to achieve 5th Dan. I cannot promote you without guidance from the National Federation. I have submitted your request. We must wait for their response." The response came 6 months later. Denied. Insufficient justification for breaking precedent. Keiko read the letter in Nakamura's office, her face showing nothing, her hands perfectly still. "I am sorry, Miyamoto-san," Nakamura said, and he genuinely was. "I advocated for you, but the decision is not mine alone." "I understand, sensei," Keiko said, but she didn't understand. She understood the facts, that the Federation had denied her promotion, that precedent mattered more than merit. But she didn't understand the why beneath it. Why was she not enough? She'd won everything, defeated everyone, proven her skill beyond any possible doubt. And still the answer was no. That night, sitting alone in her small apartment, she'd moved out of her family home at 25, another scandalous choice. Unmarried women didn't live alone. She made a decision. If the system wouldn't acknowledge her mastery, she would force acknowledgement from outside the system. She would challenge someone whose skill couldn't be questioned. Someone foreign, so the loss wouldn't be to a Japanese man. Someone famous, so the challenge couldn't be ignored. She spent a year waiting for the opportunity. And then, in October 1966, Bruce Lee arrived in Tokyo. An American, a television star, a martial artist whose reputation was growing, but whose skill was unproven in Japan. Perfect. She knew what the challenge would cost her. Knew that Japanese society would punish her for the directness, the presumption, the violation of every rule about how women should behave. But she also knew that the ceiling wasn't going to break on its own. Someone had to break it. And if that someone was her, and if the cost was her reputation, her standing, her place in the community, well, she'd already lost those things. They just didn't know it yet. Keiko sat alone in the women's changing room, her GI already on, her belt tied with the precise knot she'd learned 20 years ago. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her breathing was perfectly controlled. Her mind was perfectly clear. She'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. Not this specific moment. She hadn't known Bruce Lee would be the catalyst, but for the moment when she would force the world to see her not as impressive for a woman, but simply as impressive. The door opened. Nakamura-sensei entered, his face showing the complicated distress of a man watching someone he respected destroy herself. "Miyamoto-san," he began, "it is not too late. You can withdraw the challenge. Say you were overcome with emotion. I will make apologies to Lee-san." "No one will." "No," Keiko interrupted, her voice quiet but absolute. "You do not understand what you have done," Nakamura said, his tone desperate now. "A woman challenging a man publicly. This is not acceptable. The Federation will. The Federation has already made their decision about me," Keiko said. "I am good enough to win tournaments. Not good enough to advance. There is nothing more they can take from me." "They can take your rank," Nakamura said. "They can remove you from competition. They can make it so no dojo in Japan will accept you." Keiko looked at him, her face showing a sadness he hadn't seen before. "Sensei, they have already done those things. They just did them quietly, through denial rather than action. This," she gestured toward the dojo floor, "is me choosing to burn loudly rather than suffocate quietly." Nakamura stared at her, understanding finally settling on his face. "You knew," he said, "when you issued the challenge. You knew what it would cost." "Yes." "And you did it anyway." "Yes." Nakamura was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed, formally, deeply, with genuine respect. Then I will serve as referee, he said, and I will ensure the match is fair. He left before she could respond. Keiko sat alone for another minute, listening to the muffled sounds from the main dojo, 300 people finding their seats, conversations in hushed tones, the energy of anticipation building. She thought of her father, who had died 2 years earlier, his heart giving out at 56, worn down by years of hard living after the war. He'd never seen her win a national championship, never saw her achieve fourth dan, never knew that his early morning lessons in their courtyard would produce Japan's greatest female karateka. But he'd known something else. He'd known, from that first morning when she asked him to teach her, that she was different, that she wouldn't accept limitations just because they were traditional. You have your mother's stubbornness and my violence, he'd told her once when she was 16. That combination is either going to make you great or destroy you. Probably both. He'd been right. Keiko stood, adjusted her GI one final time, and walked toward the door. Whatever happened in the next 3 minutes would define the rest of her life. She was ready. In a small room on the opposite side of the dojo, Bruce Lee sat in Seiza, formal kneeling position, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and controlled. He wasn't nervous. Nervousness was wasted energy, and Bruce had trained himself to waste nothing. But he was intensely focused, running through the same calculation he'd been running since Keiko issued her challenge 20 minutes ago. The problem wasn't the fight itself. Bruce had sparred with hundreds of opponents over 15 years of serious training. He understood his own capabilities, understood how to read opponents, how to adapt to their strategies, how to control the pace and distance of an encounter. The problem was the context. If he defeated Keiko too easily, it would humiliate her, confirm every prejudice that women couldn't compete with men, that her 40 victories meant nothing because she'd only fought other women. But if he held back too much, if he obviously let her look good, that would be its own form of disrespect. It would say, "You're not good enough to require my full attention, so I'll play with you." The only path that honored her courage was to fight her seriously, as he would any skilled opponent, and trust that she could handle whatever happened. But fighting seriously against a woman in 1966 Japan in front of 300 witnesses that carried risks Bruce couldn't fully calculate. He opened his eyes. Sato stood in the doorway, his face showing the nervousness Bruce wasn't allowing himself to feel. "Lee-san," Sato said in English. "They are ready." Bruce stood, rolled his shoulders, shook out his arms. He was wearing black cotton pants and a simple white t-shirt. Not a traditional GI, which was itself a statement. He wasn't here representing any particular style or tradition. He was here as himself. "Sato-san," Bruce said as they walked toward the main dojo. "In your opinion, what does Miyamoto-san want from this match?" Sato considered the question carefully. "I think," Sato paused, choosing words, "I think she wants to be seen. Not as woman who fights, as fighter who is woman. You understand difference?" Bruce nodded. He understood perfectly. "Then I'll make sure she's seen," Bruce said. They reached the entrance to the main dojo floor. Through the doorway, Bruce could see the space. 50 feet by 50 feet of polished wooden floor, the shrine at the far end, the 300 spectators seated in formal rows along the walls. In the center, waiting in a perfect ready stance, Keiko Miyamoto. Bruce took a breath, centered himself, and stepped onto the floor. The crowd's murmur died instantly. Bruce walked to the center, stopped 10 feet from Keiko, and bowed, formal, deep, holding the position for 3 full seconds. The bow of one master to another. Keiko returned it exactly, her bow matching his in depth and duration. They rose simultaneously. Nakamura-sensei stepped between them, his face grave, his role as referee placing him in the center of something he clearly wished wasn't happening. "The terms," Nakamura announced in Japanese, his voice carrying across the silent dojo. 3 minutes. Light contact to body only. No strikes to face or groin. No throws or takedowns. Pure striking. Referee may stop the match at any time if control is lost or if injury occurs. Do both competitors understand and accept these terms? "Ah," Keiko said. Yes, Bruce said in English, then repeated in Japanese, hi. Nakamura looked at each of them in turn, his eyes asking a question neither of them would answer. Are you sure you want to do this? Then he stepped back, raised his hand, and dropped it. Hajime, begin. For the first 5 seconds, neither of them moved. They stood in their respective stances, Keiko in traditional Zenkutsudachi, her weight forward, her hands in standard Shotokan guard position. Bruce in his modified stance, weight distributed more evenly, hands lower and looser, fingers open rather than fisted. Bruce used those 5 seconds to read everything he could from her posture, her breathing, her eyes. Height, 5'6", tall for a Japanese woman. Reach, probably 68 inches, accounting for her longer-than-average arms. Weight, maybe 135 pounds, all of it conditioned muscle. Stance, textbook perfect, showing decades of repetition. Balance, rooted but not rigid, suggesting she could shift quickly despite the deep stance. But most importantly, her eyes showed no fear. No hosatashchen, no doubt. Whatever Keiko Miyamoto was feeling internally, nervousness, determination, desperation, she had perfect control of her external presentation. That told Bruce everything he needed to know about her level of mastery. Keiko moved first. A probing front kick, Meijeri, testing range and reaction time. The kick was fast, snapping out from her chamber and recoiling in maybe 0.3 of a second. Bruce's response was minimal. He shifted his weight slightly, letting the kick pass through the space where his center line had been a moment before. No block, no pity, just absence. Keiko's eyes narrowed incrementally. She'd learned something from that exchange. Bruce's reactive speed was extremely high. She tried again, this time with a combination Meijeri to low, then Gyakuzuki, a reverse punch to the body. Bruce redirected the kick with a downward pack saw, then slipped the punch by rotating his torso, the fist passing 2 inches from his ribs. Still no counter. Still just defense. Keiko reset, her breathing still controlled, her face still showing no emotion. But Bruce could see her mind working, recalculating, adjusting strategy. She'd expected him to counter by now, expected him to show his offense, reveal his patterns. But Bruce was giving her nothing. Just defense. Just study. The crowd was silent, everyone watching with the intensity of people witnessing something unprecedented. A woman and a man, both clearly skilled, engaged in combat that was controlled but absolutely real. 30 seconds had elapsed. Keiko changed tactics. She started moving, not attacking, just stepping, circling, changing angles, testing how Bruce would respond to lateral movement. Bruce turned to face her, his footwork smooth and efficient, his body always oriented toward the threat, but he didn't advance. Didn't press. Just maintained optimal distance. Keiko feinted high, a quick hand movement suggesting a jab to the face, and when Bruce's hands rose slightly in response, she threw her first committed technique. Mawashi Jeri, the roundhouse kick that had won her 40 fights, aimed at Bruce's ribs. The kick was fast, tournament-winning fast, the kind of speed that most opponents couldn't react to in time. But Bruce had been watching Keiko for 3 hours before this match, had seen her throw that kick a dozen times, had studied the setup, the slight weight shift to her back leg, the micro-rotation of her hips, the half-second tell that came before the chamber. He'd seen it coming before she threw it. Bruce's defense was economical. A simple step back, just enough to let the kick fall short by 2 inches, combined with a downward pack saw that redirected her shin slightly, ensuring that even if his distance calculation was wrong, the kick wouldn't land clean. The kick missed. Keiko's foot hit nothing but air. She recovered instantly. Her recoil was as fast as her extension and reset to her stance. But something had changed in her eyes. A flash of surprise, quickly controlled, but visible. That was her best technique. The technique that had knocked out Yuki Takahashi 3 hours ago. The technique that had won her 5 national championships. And Bruce had made it look easy to defend. 1 minute had elapsed. Bruce decided it was time to show her something. Keiko attacked again. Oizuki, a lunge punch, committed and powerful. Bruce didn't retreat this time. Instead, he moved forward inside the punch, using a technique Keiko had never seen before. He parried her punch with his lead hand, not a hard block, just a redirection, and simultaneously stepped in a trapping range, his rear hand controlling her back arm before she could retract it. For maybe half a second, they were pressed close, Bruce controlling both of Keiko's arms, his position giving him access to a dozen different strikes, while she had no defense available. Bruce's hand moved toward her throat. Not a strike, just a touch, his fingertips resting lightly against her trachea. "Coco," he said quietly in Japanese. "Here." Then he released her and stepped back, resetting to fighting distance. The crowd inhaled sharply, not because of violence, but because of the implication. Bruce had demonstrated a finishing position, had shown that if this were real combat, the fight would be over. And he'd done it in a way that didn't hurt her, didn't make her look foolish, just showed the technical reality. He could access targets she couldn't defend. Keiko's face showed nothing, but Bruce saw her processing, running through the sequence in her mind, understanding what had happened, calculating how to prevent it from happening again. She attacked again immediately, not giving herself time to overthink. A combination this time. Meijeri, Gyakuzuki, Mawashi-juri. The same sequence Bruce had seen earlier, but faster now, more committed, less concerned with conservation of energy. Bruce defended the first two techniques conventionally, evasion and redirection, but when a Mawashi-juri came, he did something unexpected. He stepped into it, not away like before. Into the kick, closing the distance before Keiko's leg could fully extend, positioning himself in the dead zone where the kick had no power. His hands trapped her leg mid-chamber, controlling her balance. And for a moment, Keiko was standing on one foot with Bruce controlling the other, completely vulnerable. Bruce's hand moved again, this time toward her solar plexus, stopping 1 inch from contact. "Coco," he said again. He released her leg and stepped back. 90 seconds had elapsed. Keiko was breathing harder now, not from exhaustion, but from a mental effort of trying to solve a problem she'd never encountered before. Every attack she launched, Bruce either evaded or controlled, and his counters, when he chose to show them, were accessing targets she couldn't protect. She was losing, not dramatically, not obviously, but definitively, and everyone watching knew it. But here's what happened next. The thing that would make this match legendary, the thing that neither Bruce nor Keiko expected. Keiko smiled, not a big smile, just a small curve at the corner of her mouth, visible for maybe 2 seconds before her face returned to its neutral mask. But that smile told Bruce everything. She wasn't humiliated. She was fascinated. She wasn't thinking, "How do I avoid losing?" She was thinking, "How does he do that?" The last 30 seconds of the match changed character. Keiko stopped trying to win and started trying to learn. She threw techniques not to score points, but to see how Bruce would respond, to understand his system, to decode the principles underlying his defense. And Bruce, recognizing the shift, started teaching. When she threw Meijeri, he showed her 3 different responses: evasion, redirection, and interception, demonstrating the options available, letting her see the decision-making process. When she threw Mawashi-juri again, he showed her why his step-in defense worked. The geometry of the kick, the angle where power existed and where it didn't, the timing window where interception was possible. It became less like fighting and more like a conversation conducted in the language of movement. The crowd watched in confused silence. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd expected either a dominant male victory or a surprising female upset. What they were witnessing was something else entirely. 2 martial artists communicating through technique, one teaching, one learning, both focused entirely on the exchange rather than the outcome. Nakamura-sensei watched from the edge of the floor, his face showing something he hadn't felt in decades, the humility of witnessing something beyond his understanding. He'd trained for 40 years, achieved 7th Dan, taught hundreds of students. But what Bruce was demonstrating, this adaptive, formless approach that seemed to have no fixed techniques, only principles, this was outside Nakamura's framework. And Keiko was absorbing it in real time, her attacks already starting to modify, becoming less linear, more adaptive, testing different angles and timings. The whistle blew. 3 minutes. Match over. Both fighters stopped instantly, stepping back, their breathing elevated but controlled. Nakamura approached, his face showing the burden of having to declare a winner in a match where winning seemed beside the point. The match goes to Lee San, Nakamura announced, his voice formal. Superior control and tactical advantage demonstrated throughout. The crowd applauded, respectfully, formally, without enthusiasm. They'd witnessed something, but they weren't sure what. Bruce bowed to Keiko. Keiko bowed to Bruce. They rose, and Keiko did something that made the entire dojo gasp again. She spoke, in English, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Teach me, she said. Not question. A statement of intention. Bruce's eyes widened slightly. He glanced at Nakamura, whose face had gone pale, then back at Keiko. What do you want to learn? Bruce asked, also in English. What you just showed me, Keiko said. The formlessness. The adaptation. The way you see attacks before they happen. I want that. Your karate is excellent, Bruce said carefully. What I do is different, but not superior. Just different. It's superior, Keiko said flatly. You control that entire match. You could have hit me a dozen times. You chose not to. That is superiority, not just in technique, but in control. Bruce was silent for a moment, calculating implications. Then he said, I leave Tokyo in 3 days. I can't. Then 3 days, Keiko interrupted. Teach me for 3 days. Whatever you can show me in that time. I'll learn the rest on my own. Nakamura stepped forward, his face showing the distress of a man watching his world reshape itself. Miyamoto-san, this is inappropriate. Lee-san is a guest. You cannot demand. I'm not demanding, Keiko said, switching back to Japanese. I am asking. There's a difference. She turned back to Bruce, her eyes showing something he hadn't seen before. Not desperation, not aggression, but hunger. The hunger of someone who'd reached the limits of her system and discovered those limits weren't the end, just a ceiling. And someone was offering to show her how to break through. Bruce thought about the implications, about how staying to teach Keiko would be controversial, about how it might damage his relationship with Nakamura, with the Japanese martial arts community he was trying to build bridges with. Then he thought about the smile, the one she'd shown during the match, the moment she'd stopped fighting to win and started fighting to understand. That smile had shown him who she really was, not a fighter seeking victory, but a martial artist seeking mastery. He couldn't refuse that. 3 days, Bruce said, starting tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. This dojo. Keiko's face remained neutral, but her eyes showed gratitude so profound it was almost painful to see. Hi, she said. Thank you, Lee-san. She bowed deeply, not the formal match bow, but the bow of student to teacher, and left the floor. The crowd erupted into chaos. Conversations exploding, people arguing, some outraged at the cultural violations they'd just witnessed, others amazed at the technical display, everyone trying to process what had just happened. Nakamura stood beside Bruce, his face showing resignation. You understand, Nakamura said quietly in Japanese, that by agreeing to teach her, you have made this situation more complicated, not less. I understand, Bruce replied in the same language. And you chose to do it anyway. I chose to do it anyway. Nakamura studied Bruce for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised Bruce. Good. She has been limited by our system for too long. Perhaps an outside perspective is what she needs. Perhaps it is what we all need. He turned and walked away, leaving Bruce standing alone on the dojo floor, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to, and whether 3 days would be enough to teach someone to break through a ceiling that an entire culture had built around her. The morning after the match, Bruce arrived at Nakamura's dojo at 5:45 a.m. to find Keiko already there, sitting in Seiza in the empty training area, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and meditative. She'd been there for 30 minutes, Nakamura told him quietly, preparing, centering herself, understanding that what came next would require her to temporarily forget 20 years of training to learn something new. This is difficult for a master, Nakamura said, his voice showing respect for what Keiko was attempting. To return to beginner's mind after achieving mastery. Most people cannot do it. Their ego prevents them. But Miyamoto-san, he paused. She has already proven she is not most people. Bruce set down his bag in the changing room and walked onto the training floor in bare feet, wearing the same black cotton pants and white t-shirt from yesterday. Keiko opened her eyes as he approached, stood, and bowed. Good morning, Lee-san. Good morning, Miyamoto-san. Bruce gestured to the open floor space. Before we begin, I need to understand what you already know. Not just techniques, I saw those yesterday, but principles. What you understand about fighting that goes deeper than the movements themselves. Keiko considered the question carefully, her face showing the concentration of someone trying to articulate knowledge that had become intuitive. Karate is about Mai, she said, using the Japanese term for distancing. Understanding the space between you and your opponent. Every distance has different techniques that work. Close distance, elbows, knees, trapping. Medium distance, punches, front kicks. Long distance, roundhouse kicks, back kicks. A fighter controls Mai, controls the fight. Bruce nodded. That's correct. What else? Timing is everything, Keiko continued. A slow technique with perfect timing beats a fast technique with poor timing. I can see attacks coming. Not because I'm psychic, but because every attack has a setup. A tell. Weight shifts, shoulder movements, I focus. If you can read the setup, you can respond before the attack launches. Good, Bruce said. What else? Keiko paused, searching for the right words. Balance is power, she said finally. A technique thrown from unstable position has no real power, even if it looks impressive. My sensei taught me, stance is foundation. Everything built on weak foundation will collapse. So I always maintain strong stance, always keep my center of gravity controlled. Bruce listened to all of this, nodding, his face showing appreciation for Keiko's understanding. She wasn't just a fighter who executed techniques mechanically. She understood theory, understood the why beneath the how. Everything you just said is true, Bruce said, and also limiting. Keiko's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in intense focus. Explain, she said. Bruce smiled slightly. Direct. No false modesty. No pretending to be a passive student. She wanted to learn, which meant she needed honest communication, not cultural performance. Let's start with Mai, distancing, Bruce said. You said every distance has techniques that work, but you're thinking in fixed categories. Close, medium, long. What happens if you can transition between those distances faster than your opponent can adjust? What if you could be at long distance one moment and close distance the next before they process that you moved? Keiko's face showed the slight shift that indicated new information integrating with existing knowledge. Then the categories become fluid, she said slowly. Then you're not fighting at one distance. You're fighting at all distances simultaneously. Exactly, Bruce confirmed. That's the first principle I want to teach you. Formlessness. Don't lock yourself into one distance, one stance, one approach. Be water. Water has no shape. It takes the shape of whatever container it's in. Fighting should be the same. No fixed form. Only adaptation to whatever the situation requires. He gestured to the training floor. Show me your Zen Kutsadachi. Your forward stance. Keiko dropped into the stance. Textbook perfect, deep and rooted, her back leg straight, her front knee bent at exactly 90 degrees, her weight distributed 60% forward, 40% back. That stance is powerful, Bruce observed. From that position, you can generate tremendous force in your strikes. Your Mawashi-jiri yesterday came from that stance, and it had enough power to knock out opponents. But he moved forward quickly, stopping just outside her range. That stance also commits you. You're rooted. To move from that position requires time to shift your weight, adjust your feet. Maybe half a second. Against some opponents, that's fine. Against others, that half second is fatal. Bruce dropped into his own stance. Weight distributed 50-50, knees slightly bent, but not deeply, feet closer together, his entire posture looking almost casual compared to Keiko's formal stance. This stance has less power, Bruce said, but more mobility. I can move in any direction instantly. I can shift distance in a fraction of the time it takes you to shift from Zenkutsudachi. And in a real fight, mobility often matters more than power, because you can't use power if you can't reach your target. Keiko studied his stance, her mind clearly working through the implications. But doesn't that sacrifice the foundation my sensei taught me about? She asked. If stance is foundation, and your stance is lighter, doesn't that make your foundation weaker? Only if you think foundation means being rooted to one spot, Bruce said. I think foundation means being balanced and ready. And you can be balanced while moving. In fact, you should always be ready to move. Static is death. Static means your opponent knows where you are and can plan accordingly. Mobile means you're unpredictable. Bruce moved suddenly, not attacking, just stepping forward into the side, covering 6 feet in 2 quick steps, demonstrating how his lighter stance allowed instant repositioning. Try to hit me, he said. Keiko didn't hesitate. Her Mawashi-jiri snapped out, aimed at where Bruce had been a moment before. But Bruce was already gone, having stepped offline the moment her weight shifted to chamber the kick. Again, Bruce said. She tried 3 more times, Meijiri, Gyakuzuki, another Mawashi-jiri. Each time, Bruce was simply not there when the technique arrived, having moved the instant he read her intention. You're reading my tells, Keiko said, frustration creeping into her voice for the first time. Yes, Bruce confirmed, but I'm also not giving you a stationary target. Even if you eliminate all your tells, which is nearly impossible, you still have to deal with the fact that I'm not standing still waiting to be hit. Most karate training assumes both fighters will maintain their positions and exchange techniques. But real fighting isn't like that. Real fighting is about controlling distance dynamically, moving constantly, never being where your opponent expects. Keiko absorbed this, her face showing the mental adjustment happening in real time. Show me, she said. Show me how to move like that. For the next hour, Bruce worked with Keiko on footwork. Not karate footwork, not the formal stepping patterns she'd learned in kata, but adaptive footwork. Small steps, constant motion, weight always balanced, always ready to move in any direction. Think of yourself as a boxer, Bruce said. Boxers move constantly because if they stand still, they get hit. Same principle applies to all fighting. Motion creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates openings. They drilled basic movements: forward step, backward step, lateral step, angle step. Simple on paper, but Keiko was fighting against 20 years of muscle memory that wanted to drop into deep stances, that wanted to root and generate power from stillness. This feels weak, Keiko said after 30 minutes of drilling. Like I'm dancing instead of fighting. It feels weak because you're used to generating power from static positions, Bruce said. But power isn't just about how hard you hit. It's about whether you hit at all. A weak strike that lands is more effective than a powerful strike that misses. And mobility makes it much easier to land strikes. He demonstrated by having Keiko stand in her traditional Zenkutsudachi while he moved around her in his lighter stance, tapping her shoulders, ribs, back. Light touches showing where strikes could land. In your stance, I have to come to you, Bruce explained. I have to enter your range, which gives you time to respond. But in my stance, I can be anywhere, can attack from any angle, can make you turn, adjust, constantly react. And every time you're reacting, you're not attacking. You're defensive. You're behind the action instead of ahead of it. Keiko's face showed the frustration of someone realizing that something they'd spent 2 decades perfecting might not be optimal. Are you saying everything I learned is wrong? She asked, her voice carefully controlled, but showing emotion beneath. No, Bruce said firmly. I'm saying everything you learned is incomplete. Traditional karate gave you excellent technique, powerful strikes, good discipline. But it gave you those things within a framework, a set of rules about how fighting should work. What I'm teaching you is how to function outside that framework, how to adapt when your opponent doesn't follow the rules you expect. He paused, making sure she was hearing him. Your karate is not wrong, Bruce continued, but it's limiting, like learning to swim in a pool and then discovering there's an ocean. The skills you learned in the pool still work, but the ocean requires additional skills. Requires you to adapt to currents, to waves, to conditions that don't exist in a controlled environment. Keiko nodded slowly, the frustration on her face shifting to something else. Determination. Then teach me to swim in the ocean, she said. After footwork, Bruce moved to close-range work, the area where traditional karate was weakest and where Bruce's Wing Chun background gave him the most sophisticated tools. Yesterday, during our match, Bruce said, I got inside your punches twice, controlled your arms, and accessed your throat. You remember? I remember, Keiko said. The memory was clearly frustrating. Those moments where she'd been completely controlled, unable to defend or counter. That's called trapping, Bruce explained. It comes from Wing Chun, a Chinese martial art designed for close-quarters fighting. The principle is, when you're too close to strike with power, you control your opponent's arms so they can't strike you, and you access targets they can't defend. It's geometry and sensitivity combined. He demonstrated on Keiko, moving slowly. When she threw a punch, he parried it with one hand while his other hand controlled her back arm, pinning both her limbs and leaving her center line completely open. Feel that? Bruce asked. Your arms are controlled. You can't punch me. You can't block me. I have access to your throat, your solar plexus, your face, any target I want. And it all happened in less than a second. Keiko tried to escape the trap, using strength to pull her arms free. Bruce's grip tightened slightly, demonstrating that force against force didn't work. Don't fight the trap with strength, Bruce instructed. That's a losing battle. Instead, change the angle. Redirect. Move where I'm not controlling. He released her, and they drilled the escape. When trapped, turn your body, change levels, create new angles that invalidate the trap's geometry. But better than escaping a trap, Bruce said, is not getting trapped in the first place. And that requires sensitivity, the ability to feel what your opponent is doing through contact. He introduced Chi Saw, sticking hands, the Wing Chun sensitivity drill. Both fighters maintain contact with their forearms, rolling in a continuous pattern, feeling for openings through touch rather than sight. Close your eyes, Bruce instructed. Keiko looked skeptical but complied. Now attack me, Bruce said. Any technique, but keep your forearms in contact with mine. Keiko tried to punch through the center. Instantly, she felt Bruce's arms redirect her strike, felt his structure fill the space where she'd tried to attack, felt his counter coming before it arrived. You felt that? Bruce asked. The moment I redirected you? That's sensitivity. At close range, touch gives you more information than sight. Your eyes can be deceived. They can't see fast enough. But touch is instant. You feel my intention the moment it begins. They drilled Chi Saw for 30 minutes, Bruce correcting Keiko's structure, teaching her to feel pressure changes, to understand what different types of force meant. Pushing force, pulling force, rotational force, and how to respond to each. This is completely different from karate, Keiko said, her eyes still closed, her arms moving through the rolling pattern. In karate, we train to see attacks, to read body language. But this is like a different sense entirely. It is a different sense, Bruce confirmed. And it's crucial for close-range fighting. Because at close range, you don't have time to see and process and respond. You have to feel and respond simultaneously. That's what Wing Chun developed over 300 years. A system for fighting in a phone booth, where you can't use distance or mobility, only sensitivity and structure. Keiko opened her eyes, her face showing fascination. Can I integrate this into my karate? She asked. That's exactly what you should do, Bruce said. Don't abandon what you know. Add to it. Take the power and precision of Shotokan. Combine it with the mobility I'm teaching you. Add the close-range sensitivity from Wing Chun. Make it your own system. That's Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. Not a specific style, but a philosophy. Take what's useful, discard what's not. Add what is uniquely your own. The final hour of the first day focused on the core principle that gave Jeet Kune Do its name, interception. Most fighting is reactive, Bruce explained. Your opponent attacks, you block, then you counter. But there's a problem with that approach. You're always one step behind. They act, you react. That puts you in a defensive mindset. You're waiting for them to do something, then responding. He demonstrated with Keiko. Attack me with anything. Keiko threw a Meijeri, front kick, fast and committed. Bruce stepped forward into the side, his hand intercepting her kick at the shin before it could fully extend, simultaneously throwing a light punch toward her center line that stopped 1 inch from contact. See what happened? Bruce asked. You attacked, but I didn't block and then counter. I intercepted your attack while it was forming and hit you at the same time. That's simultaneous defense and offense. That's interception. Keiko's eyes widened. You hit me while I was still attacking. Exactly, Bruce said. And because I hit you first, your attack never completes. That's the principle. Don't wait for the full attack to develop, then defend and counter as separate actions. Instead, see the attack in its preparation phase and intercept it before it matures. This way, you're always ahead of your opponent instead of behind them. They drilled this concept repeatedly. Bruce would signal for Keiko to attack. Any technique, her choice, and he would intercept at different phases. Early interception, hitting during the preparation phase before the technique launches. Mid-interception, deflecting during the execution phase while simultaneously countering. Late interception, the traditional block then counter, but done faster as one combined motion. The goal, Bruce explained, is to make early interception your default. Because if you can see attacks forming and stop them before they fully develop, you control the entire fight. You're not responding to what your opponent does. You're determining what they're allowed to do. Keiko struggled with this initially. Her karate training had programmed her to fully commit to each technique, to complete the motion regardless of what her opponent did. But interception required pulling back techniques mid-execution when she sensed Bruce's counter coming. This is so different, Keiko said, her frustration evident. In karate, we're taught to commit fully, to execute techniques with absolute determination. But what you're teaching requires hesitation, uncertainty. I don't know how to describe it. Not hesitation, Bruce corrected. Adaptability. Yes, commit to your technique, but be willing to abandon it instantly if you sense it's not working. Don't fall in love with any single attack. Be willing to flow from technique to technique based on what you feel, what you see, what the situation requires. That's not weakness. That's sophistication. By the end of the 3-hour session, Keiko was exhausted. Not physically, though the training had been intense, but mentally. Bruce had deconstructed 20 years of ingrained patterns and shown her alternatives to everything she thought she knew. They sat on the edge of the dojo floor, both drinking water, the morning sun now streaming through the high windows. Tomorrow, Bruce said, we'll work on integration, taking these principles and incorporating them into your existing karate, so you don't have to abandon what you know, just expand it. But today was about breaking down assumptions, about showing you that the rules you thought were absolute are actually just one approach among many. Keiko nodded, her face showing exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. When I challenged you yesterday, she said quietly, I was expecting to lose. I knew you were skilled. I just wanted the chance to test myself against someone outside our system. But I wasn't expecting, she paused, searching for words. I wasn't expecting you to teach me during the match, to show me options instead of just defeating me. You earned that teaching by being open to it, Bruce said. Most people, when they lose, their ego prevents them from learning anything. They make excuses, they blame circumstances, they convince themselves their opponent got lucky. But you smiled during the match, when you realized I was showing you something new. That smile told me you were more interested in growth than victory. That's rare. That's what makes you a true martial artist, not just a fighter. Keiko absorbed this, her face showing emotion for the first time since Bruce had met her. In Japan, she said slowly, there's a concept, Kaizen, continuous improvement. The idea that you should always be getting better, always be refining, never be satisfied with where you are. But our martial arts have become, she struggled with how to say this without dishonoring her tradition, static. We perfect forms that were created 100 years ago, and we stop there. We achieve mastery within the system, and then we stop growing. Because to grow beyond the system would mean admitting the system is incomplete. All systems are incomplete, Bruce said. That's not a criticism. It's just reality. Every martial art was created to solve specific problems in a specific context. But contexts change. Problems evolve. So martial arts must evolve too, or they become museum pieces, beautiful, historically important, but not alive. Not growing. He stood, stretched, rolled his shoulders. Tomorrow, 6 a.m., Bruce said. We'll work on making this practical for you. Making it yours. Keiko stood as well, bowed formally. Thank you, Lee-san. Today you gave me something I've been searching for without knowing it existed. What's that? Permission, Keiko said simply. Permission to grow beyond the ceiling. To become something that doesn't exist yet. Bruce returned the bow, then walked to the changing room to collect his things. Behind him, Keiko remained standing on the training floor, her mind processing everything she'd learned, already beginning to visualize how these new principles could integrate with her existing knowledge. Already becoming something new, something that had no name yet, something that in 1966 Japan wasn't supposed to be possible. A woman who transcended the limits placed on her not through force, but through understanding, through willingness to admit she didn't know everything, through the courage to return to beginner's mind despite being a master. That night, in her small apartment, Keiko filled 3 pages in her training journal with notes, diagrams, observations. Not trying to capture everything Bruce had taught, that would take years to fully integrate, but capturing the essence. Form is useful until it becomes limiting. Power without mobility is just power without opportunity. Sensitivity is a sense that can be developed like sight or hearing. Interception means being ahead of your opponent's intention, not just ahead of their action. True mastery is being willing to be a beginner again and again, forever. She closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay awake in the dark, her body exhausted, but her mind alive with possibilities. Tomorrow would be day 2, and she could hardly wait. Bruce arrived at the dojo at 5:50 a.m. on the second morning to find Keiko already warming up. But she wasn't doing traditional karate warm-ups, the formal stretching routines and kata repetitions he'd expected. Instead, she was practicing the footwork patterns he'd taught her yesterday, moving around the floor in small steps, shifting angles, testing how her body responded to the lighter stance. You've been practicing, Bruce observed, setting down his bag. Since 5 a.m., Keiko confirmed, not stopping her movement. I wanted to understand it in my body before you arrived. Theory is one thing. Muscle memory is another. Bruce smiled slightly. This was what separated serious students from casual ones. The willingness to put in extra work, to practice alone, to integrate new information through repetition rather than just intellectual understanding. Show me your Mawashi Jerry from the new stance, Bruce said. Keiko shifted smoothly, chambered the kick, and threw her signature roundhouse. But something was different. The kick was slightly faster than before, the chamber more compact, the recovery quicker. Because she wasn't starting from a deep Zenkutsudachi, she didn't have to shift as much weight to initiate the technique. Good, Bruce said. You're already adapting. The kick has less raw power than your traditional version, but it's faster and you can throw it from more angles. That's the trade-off. Now the question is, when do you use which version? That's what I was trying to figure out this morning, Keiko admitted. When does power matter more than speed? When does speed matter more than power? It depends on the situation, Bruce said. If you have time and space to set up, if your opponent is staying at medium range and you can control the distance, then use the power version. Drop it as Zenkutsudachi, chamber fully, throw with maximum force. But if you're in close, if distance is unstable, if you need to strike and reposition quickly, use the mobile version. Less power, but more adaptability. He gestured to the training floor. Let's drill this. I'll move at different distances, different speeds. You decide in real time which version to use. The goal is to make the decision automatic. Your body choosing the appropriate technique based on the distance and timing available. For the next hour, they worked on contextual adaptation. Bruce would create situations, sometimes staying at long range, giving Keiko time to set up powerful techniques, sometimes closing suddenly, forcing her to strike from her mobile stance without setup time, sometimes moving unpredictably, making her adjust constantly. Initially, Keiko struggled to choose. She would default to her traditional techniques because they were ingrained, even when the situation called for something more adaptive. But gradually, she began to feel the difference, began to sense when she had time for power versus when she needed speed. "You're starting to flow," Bruce observed after a particularly smooth sequence where Keiko had switched between 3 different kicking styles based on distance. "That's the goal. Not thinking, should I use technique A or technique B? Just responding naturally to what the situation requires. That's when martial arts becomes art instead of science." "Yesterday I taught you Chi Saw as a sensitivity drill," Bruce said. "Today I want to show you how to weaponize it." They began with basic sticking hands, maintaining contact, feeling pressure changes. But now Bruce started introducing attacks through the contact, sudden punches that came through the center, trapping sequences that controlled Keiko's arms, elbow strikes that accessed her center line. "Feel what I'm doing?" Bruce asked after catching Keiko 3 times in rapid succession. "I'm using our contact point as a sensor. The moment I feel your structure weaken, I attack through that weakness. You're telegraphing your intentions through touch, and I'm reading those intentions and exploiting them." Keiko's face showed frustration. "How do I stop telegraphing?" "You don't completely," Bruce said. "Everyone telegraphs to some degree, but you can minimize it by maintaining better structure." Here, he adjusted her arm position, raising her elbow slightly, rotating her wrist. "This structure is stronger. Harder for me to collapse. Gives you more time to respond when I try to attack." They drilled this for 45 minutes, Bruce constantly probing for weaknesses in Keiko's structure, teaching her to feel when she was vulnerable and to adjust before the attack came. "This is exhausting," Keiko said, her arms burning from maintaining proper structure under constant pressure. "My forearms feel like they're going to fall off." "That's because you're using strength instead of structure," Bruce explained. "You're trying to muscle through my pressure. But structure isn't about strength. It's about angles and positioning. A properly aligned structure can support tremendous pressure without muscular effort. Let me show you." He demonstrated with Keiko pushing against his arm. When his structure was aligned, she couldn't move him despite using considerable force. When he deliberately broke his structure, even light pressure collapsed his position. "See?" Bruce said. "Structure is geometry. If your bones are aligned properly, they do the work. Your muscles are just maintaining position, not fighting force with force." Keiko practiced this principle, gradually learning to relax her arms while maintaining structural integrity. It was counterintuitive. Her karate training had taught her to tense muscles to generate power, but gradually she felt the difference. Relaxed structure was more sensitive, more responsive, and somehow more resilient than tense muscle. The final hour of day 2 focused on making interception practical for Keiko's fighting style. "You have a tell," Bruce said. "When you're about to throw your Mawashi Jeri, your weight shifts slightly to your back leg about 1/10 of a second before you chamber. It's subtle, but it's visible, and any skilled opponent will learn to read it." Keiko's face showed surprise. "I didn't know I was doing that." "Most people don't know their tells," Bruce said. "But they exist, and the better your opponent, the faster they'll identify them. So we need to either eliminate the tell or make it less predictable." "Show me your chamber again." Keiko demonstrated the kick in slow motion. Bruce watched carefully, then adjusted her technique, shifting her weight earlier, integrating it into her general movement so it didn't signal the kick specifically. "Now the weight shift happens constantly," Bruce explained, "not just before the kick. That makes it harder to read as a specific tell. You're adding noise to the signal, essentially." They worked on this principle for multiple techniques, reducing tells, adding deceptive movements, making Keiko's intentions harder to read through body language. "But remember," Bruce said, "no matter how much you minimize tells, skilled opponents will still find patterns. So the ultimate defense isn't eliminating tells. It's being able to intercept their responses to your tells. If they've learned to counter your Mawashi Jerry, can you see them preparing that counter and hit them during their preparation? This concept, intercepting the interception, made Keiko's head hurt. It was martial chess, thinking multiple moves ahead, creating situations where her opponent's correct response to her attack became the opening for her real attack. This is incredibly complex, Keiko said. How do you process all this in real time during a fight? You don't, Bruce said. Not consciously. You train it until it becomes intuitive, until your body sees opportunities without your conscious mind having to identify them. That's what we're doing now, programming your unconscious to recognize these patterns so you can respond to them automatically during combat. They drilled action-response counter sequences until Keiko's movements became smoother, more fluid, less dependent on conscious decision-making. By the end of day 2, something had shifted in Keiko's movement quality. She was still using karate techniques, still throwing the same kicks and punches she trained for 20 years, but they were operating in a different framework. More adaptive, more responsive, less committed to finishing specific techniques, and more focused on reading the situation and adjusting. Tomorrow is our last day, Bruce said as they finished. What do you want to focus on? Keiko thought about this carefully. I want to spar, she said. Really spar. Not light contact, like our match. I want to test everything you've taught me under realistic pressure. I want to know if I can actually use these principles in real combat or if they only work in drilling. Bruce studied her face, seeing the determination there. That will be intense, he warned, and there's a chance you'll get hurt. These principles take time to integrate fully. 2 days isn't enough to rewire 20 years of training. I understand, Keiko said, but I need to know. I need to test this while you're here to show me what I'm doing wrong. Because after tomorrow, I'll be on my own, and I'll have no way to know if I'm progressing or just reinforcing bad habits. Bruce nodded slowly. She was right. Feedback was crucial, especially in the early stages of learning a new approach. Okay, he agreed. Tomorrow we spar, but we're going to do it differently than you're used to. Not one long match. Multiple rounds. 2 minutes each. After each round, we stop and I'll tell you what you did well and what needs adjustment. Then we go again. You'll be exhausted by the end, but you'll learn more in those rounds than you would in a month of solo practice. That's what I want, Keiko confirmed. They bowed to each other, and Bruce left the dojo. Keiko remained on the training floor for another hour, practicing alone, drilling the sequences they'd worked on, trying to make them more natural, more instinctive. She knew tomorrow would be difficult, knew that trying to apply new principles under pressure would probably result in Bruce dominating her even more thoroughly than he had in their first match. But she also knew that difficulty was the point. She wasn't training to look good. She was training to grow, and growth required being willing to fail, to struggle, to look incompetent while learning to be competent in a new way. The third morning, Nakamura-sensei was present when Bruce arrived. The old master had stayed away from the previous 2 sessions, giving Bruce and Keiko space to work without oversight. But today, he wanted to observe. I hope you don't mind, Lee-san, Nakamura said, his Japanese formal and polite. Miyamoto-san's development interests me. I wish to see what you have taught her. Of course, Bruce said. He understood Nakamura's real concern, wanting to see if Bruce had corrupted Keiko's karate or enhanced it. The old master needed to know if this experiment had been worthwhile or destructive. Keiko was already on the floor, warming up, her face showing the focused intensity of someone preparing for a significant test. We ready? Bruce asked. Aye, Keiko confirmed. First round, 2 minutes, Bruce said. Try to use everything we've worked on. Footwork, sensitivity, interception. Don't worry about winning. Just focus on application. If you see an opening, take it. If I hit you, learn from it. Understand. Understood. They bowed to each other, then began. Bruce immediately saw Keiko's intention to apply her new knowledge. She didn't drop into her traditional deep stance. Instead, she stayed mobile, her weight balanced, moving in small steps, maintaining distance dynamically rather than statically. Good start. Bruce tested her with a lead hand, a quick jab to her face, technically against their no-face strikes rule, but light enough to be a probe rather than an attack. Keiko's response was interesting. She didn't block in the traditional karate manner, didn't throw a hard block that stopped his punch completely. Instead, she used a soft pack-saw deflection that redirected his hand while she simultaneously stepped offline. Interception principle, Bruce noted. She's trying to defend and reposition in one motion instead of block then counter. But she was still slow. Her deflection was technically correct, but her footwork and hand movement weren't quite synchronized. The result was that Bruce's punch was redirected, but she hadn't created a counter opportunity yet. Bruce pressed forward, throwing a combination, jab, cross, hook to body, forcing Keiko to defend multiple times in rapid succession. She struggled. Her deflections were working individually, but she couldn't maintain defensive flow through a multi-strike combination. After the second strike, she reverted to traditional karate, hard blocks, stopping the attacks through force rather than redirection. Bruce stopped, reset to distance. "Good attempt," he said. "You started with soft deflection, but reverted to hard blocking when pressure increased." "What? It happened too fast," Keiko admitted. "My brain couldn't process the soft deflection from multiple strikes. I defaulted to what I know." "That's normal," Bruce assured her. "Under pressure, you'll always revert to your deepest programming. That's why we drill, to make the new approach as deeply programmed as the old one. Try again, but this time, if you feel yourself reverting to hard blocks, reset and start over. Don't let yourself practice the old way, even if it means you get hit." They engaged again. This time, when Bruce threw combinations, Keiko forced herself to maintain soft deflections even when her instincts screamed to block hard. The result was that several of Bruce's strikes got through her defense. Light contact to her ribs, her shoulder, her arm. But she was learning. Each time a strike landed, she could feel why. Her deflection was late, or her footwork wasn't supporting her hand movement, or she deflected but hadn't redirected enough. 2 minutes elapsed. "First round done." "Better," Bruce said. "You let yourself get hit rather than reverting to old habits. That's the right approach. Your defense is incomplete right now, but you're developing the new pattern." "What did you notice?" "My hands and feet aren't coordinated yet," Keiko said, breathing slightly elevated. "In karate, we train them separately. Stances are one thing, hand techniques are another. But what you're teaching requires them to work together simultaneously. My brain can't process that yet." "Accurate analysis," Bruce confirmed. "That coordination will come with practice. For now, just keep drilling the pattern, even if it's slower than your old method. Speed will develop after correctness." They went 3 more rounds, each one showing incremental improvement. Keiko's deflections became slightly faster, her footwork slightly more synchronized with her hand movements. She was still getting hit. Bruce wasn't trying to hit her, but he wasn't letting her off easy either, but the quality of her defense was evolving. Round 5, something clicked. Bruce threw a jab-cross combination. Keiko deflected the jab with pack-saw, stepped offline simultaneously, and as Bruce's cross came, she was already out of the line of fire, her position giving her an angle on Bruce's exposed ribs. She threw a light punch, controlled, just to show the opening existed. Bruce stopped immediately, his face showing approval. "That," he said, "that's what we're looking for. You didn't just defend. You deflected, repositioned, and created a counter opportunity in one flowing sequence. That's interception. That's adaptation. Do it again." They reset. Bruce threw the same combination. Keiko executed the same response. Deflect, step, counter. Again, 10 more repetitions until the sequence became smoother, more natural. "Now I'm going to change the combination," Bruce said. "And you need to adapt. Don't just repeat the pattern we drilled. Read what I'm doing and respond appropriately." This was harder. When Bruce changed his attack angle or timing, Keiko sometimes reverted to old patterns, sometimes froze briefly while her brain processed, sometimes tried the new pattern but applied it incorrectly. But sometimes, maybe one time in 5, she adapted correctly. Read the new attack, adjusted her response, created the counter opportunity. Those moments made everything worthwhile. "Defense is good," Bruce said during a water break. But martial arts isn't just defense. You need to be able to attack using these principles too. Show me how you initiate offense in karate. Keiko demonstrated her typical attack patterns. Set up in Zenkutsudachi, chamber a technique, explode forward with power. Effective if you have time, Bruce observed. But telegraphed. I can see everything coming. Your stance change signals that an attack is coming. Your chamber shows me which technique. Your explosion tells me the timing. By the time you launch, I've already seen it and prepare my response. He demonstrated by having Keiko attack him 5 times. Each time, he evaded or countered easily, his response ready before her technique arrived. Frustrating, yes? Bruce said. Very, Keiko confirmed. So let's change how you initiate, Bruce said. Instead of setting up, then attacking. Instead of telegraphing your intention, attack from wherever you are. No stance change. No obvious chamber. Just attack. He demonstrated, throwing a punch at Keiko from a neutral position. No wind-up, no visible preparation. The strike came fast and arrived before Keiko could react. How did you do that? Keiko asked. There was no chamber. How did you generate power? Power came from body connection, Bruce explained. Watch carefully. He threw the punch again in slow motion. See how my hips rotate? How my rear foot pushes? How my whole body moves as a unit? The power doesn't come from pulling my hand back and then forward. It comes from my entire structure moving forward, with my arm as the final link in the chain. This way, I can throw with power from any position without telegraphing. They drilled this concept, throwing strikes without obvious preparation, generating power through body connection rather than visible chamber. It felt wrong to Keiko initially. Her karate training had ingrained the chamber-then-strike pattern so deeply that skipping the chamber felt weak, incorrect, inefficient. But when Bruce demonstrated on pads, having her hold focus mitts while he struck without chambering, the power was undeniable. His strikes weren't as powerful as fully chambered karate techniques, but they were faster, less telegraphed, and still carried significant force. This is about trade-offs again, Bruce explained. Maximum power requires setup time, but setup time gives your opponent warning. So you choose. Do you want maximum power with warning or good power without warning? Context determines which is better. Keiko practiced throwing strikes from neutral positions, gradually learning to generate power through hip rotation and body connection rather than chamber and explosion. After an hour of drilling, Bruce had her spar again, but this time, Keiko was allowed to initiate attacks, not just respond to Bruce's. The difference was remarkable. When Keiko attacked with traditional karate, Bruce evaded easily, her intentions readable. But when she attacked using the new principles, striking from neutral positions, no obvious chambers, Bruce had to work harder to defend. Several of her strikes got through his defense, landing as light touches on his ribs and shoulders. Much better, Bruce said after the round ended. You're becoming unpredictable. I can't read your intentions as easily. That makes you dangerous. Keiko's face showed the first real smile Bruce had seen from her. Not the small, controlled smile from their first match, but a genuine expression of joy at discovering her own capability. I felt it, she said, breathing hard. I felt the moment you couldn't read me. Your eyes showed confusion, just for a split second. That's never happened before. Usually people read my attacks easily. That's because you've been using a style that was designed to be readable, Bruce said. Traditional karate was developed in a context where martial artists trained together for decades, where everyone knew the same techniques, where competition was about executing techniques better than your opponent, not surprising them. But in real fighting, against opponents who don't share your style, who aren't expecting karate patterns, unpredictability is an enormous advantage. The final hour of the final day, Bruce and Keiko sat on the edge of the dojo floor, both exhausted from the intensive training. Nakamura-sensei, who had observed all 3 hours, approached them, his face showing a complicated mix of emotions. Miyamoto-san, Nakamura said formally, your movement has changed. It is still recognizably karate, but different, more fluid, less formal. I'm not sure if this is good or bad. Keiko met his eyes respectfully. Sensei, if I may speak freely? Nakamura nodded. I believe it is good, Keiko said carefully. What Lee-san has taught me doesn't replace karate. It completes it. The power, precision, and discipline I learned from you, those are still present. But now I have additional tools for different situations. I'm more complete as a martial artist than I was 3 days ago. Nakamura was silent for a long moment, his face showing internal conflict. Then he did something unexpected. He bowed to Bruce. Not a courtesy bow, but a deep, formal bow of genuine respect. Lee-san, you have taught my student things I could not teach her. Not because I lack knowledge, but because he paused, searching for words. Because I was too bound by tradition to see beyond it. You have shown me that honoring tradition doesn't mean being imprisoned by it. Bruce returned the bow. Nakamura-sensei, your tradition gave Miyamoto-san the foundation she needed to understand what I taught. Without her karate background, these principles would have been just theory. Because she mastered a traditional art first, she could understand how to go beyond tradition. You taught her the alphabet. I just showed her that the alphabet can spell many different words. Nakamura nodded slowly, appreciating the metaphor. He turned to Keiko. Miyamoto-san, I have reconsidered your test for 5th Dan. I will submit your application again to the Federation with my full recommendation. But I must warn you, what you have learned these 3 days will make some in the Federation uncomfortable. They may see it as corruption of pure karate. I understand, Sensei, Keiko said. And if they deny my promotion again because of this, I accept that consequence. What I've learned is worth more than rank. Nakamura's face showed surprise at this response, then something like pride. You have become a true martial artist, he said. Not just a practitioner of karate, but a seeker of martial truth. That is what the old masters intended martial arts to be. I am proud to have been your teacher. He bowed to both of them and left the dojo, giving them privacy for their final conversation. Bruce and Keiko sat in silence for a moment, both processing the 3 days they'd shared. What happens now? Keiko asked finally. You return to America. I continue here. How do I keep developing these principles without a teacher? You become your own teacher, Bruce said. That's what martial arts has always been about. Learning from others initially, then taking what you've learned and making it your own through personal experimentation and discovery. I've given you the foundation. Now you build on it. He pulled out a small notebook from his bag, the same one he'd been carrying when he arrived in Tokyo, and tore out several pages covered with diagrams, notes, observations. These are my training notes from the last 3 days, Bruce said, handing them to Keiko. Principles we covered, drills you can do solo, concepts to explore. Study them. Practice them. Add your own notes as you discover new things. In 5 years, your understanding will be deeper than mine because you'll have spent 5 years integrating these principles into your karate. You'll have created something I can't create because I don't have your background. Keiko took the pages carefully, as if they were sacred texts. In a way, they were. They represented 3 days of knowledge transfer that couldn't be replicated, recorded in Bruce's precise handwriting with detailed diagrams. I don't know how to thank you, Keiko said, her voice showing emotion for the first time. You gave me 3 days. Most teachers wouldn't give me 3 minutes. Most teachers wouldn't see past the fact that I'm a woman. But you treated me as a martial artist. Just a martial artist. Not a female martial artist. Just an artist. Do you know how rare that is? I do, Bruce said quietly, because I've experienced similar dismissiveness. Not because I'm a woman, but because I'm Chinese. Because I teach a foreign art. Because I don't follow traditional methods. I know what it's like to be limited not by your capability, but by other people's narrow categories. So when I see genuine talent, genuine dedication, genuine hunger to learn, I don't care about the categories. I care about the person. Keiko nodded, understanding. They were both outsiders in different ways, both fighting against systems that wanted to limit them, both determined to transcend those limitations through excellence. Will you continue competing? Bruce asked. After everything that's happened, the challenge, the controversy, learning a new approach, will you continue fighting in tournaments? Keiko thought about this carefully. Yes, she said finally, but differently. Not to prove I can beat other women. That's already proven. but to demonstrate that what you've taught me works. To show that martial arts can evolve, can integrate different approaches, can become more complete without losing its essence. If I can do that, if I can show Japanese martial artists that tradition and innovation can coexist, then maybe the ceiling I've been fighting against will break for others, not just for me. That's a worthy goal, Bruce said, and a difficult one. You'll face resistance. People who say you've abandoned pure karate. People who say you've been corrupted by foreign influence. People who are uncomfortable with what you represent. Can you handle that? I've been handling it my entire life, Keiko said. At least now I'll be handling it with better tools. Bruce smiled. Then I have no concerns about your future. You have the skill, the intelligence, and the character to succeed. The only thing you lacked was permission to go beyond your system. And you've given yourself that permission now. That's the most important thing I could teach you. Not techniques, but the confidence to transcend limitations. They stood, bowed to each other one final time. Student to teacher, teacher to student, the roles interchangeable because true learning flows both directions. If you're ever in Los Angeles, Bruce said, visit my school. I'd like to see how your art has evolved. If you're ever in Tokyo, Keiko replied, visit this dojo. I'd like to show you what I've built on your foundation. They both knew these visits would probably never happen. International travel was expensive and complicated in 1966. Their paths had crossed briefly, intensely, and would likely never cross again. But the impact of those 3 days would extend far beyond the calendar. Bruce Lee left Tokyo on October 26, 1966, returning to Los Angeles to continue filming The Green Hornet and developing Jeet Kune Do. He never returned to Japan, though he spoke about the Tokyo encounter in a few interviews, always with respect for Keiko's skill and openness to learning. He died in Hong Kong on July 20th, 1973, at age 32, his potential only partially fulfilled. Keiko Miyamoto continued training and competing. She won the All Japan Women's Championship twice more, 1967 and 1968, using a modified style that shocked traditional karate observers. Her movements were recognizably Shotokan, but enhanced with elements that had no name in Japanese martial arts: trapping, interception, adaptive footwork. Judges didn't know how to score her fights. She was technically executing karate, but her approach was so different from traditional competition that it created controversy. After her 1968 victory, the Japan Karate Federation issued new rules for women's competition, rules that, many believed, were specifically designed to limit Keiko's effectiveness by penalizing excessive mobility and requiring traditional stances. Keiko retired from competition in 1969 at age 31 and opened her own dojo in Osaka. Against enormous social pressure, she taught both men and women, and she taught them the integrated style she developed, a hybrid of Shotokan karate and Jeet Kune Do principles. Her dojo was never large. Traditional karate schools refused to recognize her teaching credentials, and many students avoided her school because training under a woman, especially a woman teaching corrupted karate, was considered shameful. But the students who did come were devoted, and among them were several who would go on to become influential in Japanese martial arts, quietly spreading the principles Keiko taught without always acknowledging their source. In 1975, 2 years after Bruce Lee's death, Keiko wrote a tribute essay titled 3 Days in October for a small Japanese martial arts magazine. The essay described her encounter with Bruce, what he'd taught her, and how it had changed her understanding of martial arts. The essay was controversial enough that the magazine received threats and canceled future issues. The editor apologized to Keiko and asked her not to submit any more articles. Keiko never published another word about Bruce or about martial arts philosophy, but she kept teaching, quietly, persistently, training students who were open-minded enough to learn from a woman, secure enough to study a non-traditional approach, dedicated enough to do the difficult work of integrating multiple systems. She achieved 6th Dan in 1980, breaking through the ceiling that had seemed impenetrable in 1966, when a new generation of Federation leadership recognized that denying her advancement was becoming indefensible. She died in 2011, at age 73, having taught martial arts for 42 years. At her funeral, 17 of her students spoke. 12 of them were men. Men who credited Keiko with teaching them not just techniques, but humility, the ability to learn from anyone regardless of gender or social status, the courage to question tradition without disrespecting it. Among the items buried with her, Bruce Lee's training notes from October 1966, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve, the papers yellowed, but the handwriting still legible. And a photograph, the only photograph taken during those 3 days, showing Bruce and Keiko on the dojo floor, both in fighting stances, both focused, both clearly respecting each other as equals. The photograph was discovered by Keiko's daughter while sorting through her mother's possessions. She donated it to the International Martial Arts Museum in 2013, where it now hangs in a small exhibit about women in martial arts history. Most visitors walk past it without noticing, but occasionally someone stops, reads the placard, studies the photograph, sees something in the way Bruce and Keiko are positioned. The mutual respect, the genuine equality, the sense of two masters engaged in dialogue rather than conflict, and understands, perhaps for the first time, what martial arts was supposed to be all along. Not about defeating opponents, about transcending limitations, not about proving superiority, about discovering truth, not about maintaining tradition, about honoring it enough to build upon it. That's what happened in Tokyo in October 1966. Two martial artists met. One challenged social conventions by issuing a public challenge. The other challenged technical conventions by teaching a different approach. Both challenged themselves by being willing to learn from someone unexpected. And for 3 days, in a dojo that most of the world never heard about, they created something that had never existed before. A synthesis, a bridge, a glimpse of what martial arts could become when ego and tradition and gender and nationalism were set aside and only the pursuit of truth remained. That's what Keiko Miyamoto fought for her entire life. Not just the right to practice martial arts as a woman, but the right to evolve martial arts as a human being. That's what Bruce Lee taught her in 3 days. Not techniques, though he taught those too, but permission. Permission to be herself, fully. Permission to question, to experiment, to transcend. Permission to become something that had no precedent. That's the real story of October 1966, and why, 58 years later, it deserves to be remembered.